Now to the big story of the week, the passing of Hulk Hogan. Unfortunately, and we've covered it a good bit on Ringside. Bubba the Love Sponge reported last month that sources that he knew in a local Florida hospital was that Hulk Hogan had major complications from a recent surgery on his neck, and that relatives were visiting him because, excuse me, that soda. He was on, near death, and they were possibly saying his final goodbyes. But because Bubba the Love Sponge is a former friend turned enemy, a lot of people go, whatever. Eric Bischoff comes out, debunks it, say, "Oh, it's not that. He just has some issues with the anesthesia. He's coming along recovery." His wife even came out with an Instagram post saying, "No, he had this kind of surgery, but he's getting better. He's not in a coma like some people are speculating. All these kinds of things." And then the news comes this week that he passed away. Cardiac arrest, and now you're getting stories about him. He this health decline. It's a shame that in the end, Bubba the Love Sponge looks right, and his friends and family were kind of trying to act like it wasn't the situation. But in the end, they lose at 71, the biggest name, honestly, maybe ever in professional wrestling. First, what are your all-time favorite Hulk Hogan moments? Because this is a guy that was in the industry for over 3 decades, like as an active wrestler. And then he had his role as, kind of backstage, whatever. But 80s, 90s into the early 2000s, like what are a few of the real standout moments for you when it comes to Hulk Hogan and his career?
Man, well, where do you even begin with a career like that? You know what I mean? Like, all the baggage aside, I, like many fans, jumped on the professional wrestling bandwagon with Hulk Hogan at the top. And that started for me at WrestleMania 3. Him and Andre, him slamming Andre was the first big event I ever saw at my cousin's house, who, they were all wrestling crazy. So I got taken along for the ride and fell in love and haven't looked back since. So that's a very formative memory for me, like it is for generations of fans, and, other things that jump out at me are stuff like the Mega Powers. I love the storyline with Savage. For the longest time, that was what I used to use it as an example for, WWE storytelling and how less pay-per-view events allowed for longer stories to play out. That played out over a year, where in the modern landscape, that'd probably be a 3-month storyline at best. And that was just fantastic stuff back then. I loved the feud with Macho, the tournament match at the beach. There were very few moments in professional wrestling that can genuinely surprise people. Yeah. That surprised 95% of the population, because nobody would have ever thought that Hogan would finally turn to the dark side. And it was done so well, and he did so well, and started yet another craze with the NWO. You know what I mean? Like, his name was just undeniable. And it's true what they say, all due respect to any other names that were floated around for that doesn't get as big as it did without Hogan. It doesn't. Yep. So, just things like that are what I'll always remember. The early times, and he was the fulcrum for professional wrestling becoming what it was. You know what I mean? Like, it's just when professional wrestling made the jump to the mainstream, he was the name at the front of the list. So I'll always remember, what he did for this form of entertainment that we love so much, and him being one of the biggest names associated with it.
The one that always stands out to me, and a lot of it are tied with just like moments in life. Like it's a moment I specifically remember where I was at in the house or the apartment, all these kinds of things. Like the first one is watching WrestleMania X7 with friends and stuff like that in my house. The only time I really did that, watching a WrestleMania with pals and stuff like that in high school, and the match with The Rock. And the crazy reaction, like it's been all over social media. Like, just he goes to the match as Hollywood Hogan. The Rock is arguably even gotten more popular than Stone Cold at that point. And the Toronto fans were like, "Nah, we're not into that." Like, and just how from the start, the reactions, like they lock up. He pushes The Rock down. He gives the flex, and the crowd loses their mind. And we're off to the races on nothing anybody at home expected to watch it. Expected this ultimate heel versus big time baby face, and things get kind of flipped in the match. That's really the first time, one of those times I remember something like that happening, other than say Bret Hart, Stone Cold kind of thing. And it just the reactions, like it's just never forget. Just watch it. Like you said, I remember I didn't see it live, but I was home I remember my mom was in the kitchen making something. I happened to put on like the WCW Saturday night or something like that, and they were showing the highlights of the heel turn, and I was absolutely blown away. I go to my mom and tell her Hulk Hogan's bad guy now. Like even she couldn't believe it, and she even knew it. Like that those kinds of things. That was one, or just like, and I mentioned this in the two lists I did for Ringside. That storyline where the Mega Powers explode, that was the first time I've gotten a taste of a great wrestling storyline where they become friends. They're such a great duo as friends. They're the two biggest stars, the most popular guys at the time. And then this guy, Macho Man, is weird jealousy with Elizabeth and like thinking Hogan was interested. They have the backstage. One of those first times they really did like a backstage segment at like the medical area. And start fighting and then where it leads, like that's like the first time I've got a taste of like really great wrestling storytelling and what it could be at its best. And those he was a part of all those things, and even like No Holds Barred, like when that movie came out, that was a thing for us. Like,
that was huge. It was huge for us.
We didn't get superhero movies, really. We got Superman, Batman, we didn't get that stuff we get now, that all that really nerd fanfare we get now. So to see him in a movie, it was like one of our people, one of our fringe, celebrity entertainment in a major motion picture, the tie-ins with, Tiny Zeus Lister on the show, and, like those kind of things just always stand out for me. Even just like my brother David was a big Warrior fan. Me and my brother Danny were Hulkamaniacs, and then when they faced off, it's like, oh man, at WrestleMania.
What side are you on? What side are you on? In the playgrounds, you know what I mean? Everybody, Hogan guy, Warrior guy. Why were you?
Yeah, like those kind of things. Those stand out like that, just part of your life. Not even you just watching a TV show and move on. Like they connected to my life at those kind of just, with all that said, man. Do you think there'll ever be anyone as influential as him, like on this industry? Because like I mentioned before, 80s, he helped put WWE on the map as a national brand. Obviously, Vince McMahon played a massive role in that, but he was the engine of that and the it factor to put on the map. Going to the 90s where it really puts professional wrestling, and again, WWE on an international level. It starts becoming a bigger brand. Then he's a part of this movement in the 90s with the NWO, where he's a main part of a cool period, a mainstream cool period for professional wrestling, along with the Attitude Era, where NWO is you got NWO shirts in your high school, in your junior high, stuff like that. It became cool with teenagers, not like the little kids or stuff like that. And then even into the 2000s, where he has that WrestleMania X8 moment, and is a big moneymaker, putting butts in seats guys for over 3 decades. I can't think of anybody that's come like as big as Stone Cold was. That was like 5 years. As big as John Cena was, like the platform was already established. And as good as John Cena was, he was never Hollywood Hogan cool. He had a divided fan audience. Like, is there anyone that you think has or could have that kind of impact in professional wrestling like this guy did?
I really don't. If we're being honest, I don't think there's in the history of professional wrestling, the only name I think is more influential than Hulk Hogan is unfortunately Vince McMahon. And even that's debatable because, if you go to most of the general public, they might know Vince McMahon from the scandals and things like that, but everybody knows who Hulk Hogan is. Even to this day, the image of a professional wrestler, with the possible exception of The Rock, the first image that comes up in anybody's mind is Hulk Hogan. He's that omnipresent with professional wrestling. And the reason for that is because, he was the guy at its most important time, at its most formative time. Like if somebody were to become as big as Hulk Hogan now, and arguably it has been, John Cena, Roman Reigns, some of those names, they would just be making something that's already big even bigger. Yeah. Hogan was there for the change, the epicenter of the change in professional wrestling. What Vince did with tying in the territories and making it a global brand hadn't been done before, at least not to that scope in professional wrestling. And Hogan was the driving force of that. He was the star of the show, and it worked. You know what I mean? Like, people loved Hogan on top. He had such a run during that time, and fans were just going crazy for him. And he was undeniably charismatic. And to your point, what he was able to do again with the NWO, the only reason that was that big was because it was Hogan. So yeah, no, I don't think anybody will be as influential, as big of a name as Hulk Hogan was, at least not as it relates to being tied with professional wrestling. He's the biggest name there ever was.
Yeah, because it's just he was a part of the first boom, then a key part of the second boom, and that there's a lot of people we've seen for years like that are in pro wrestling a very long time, and they're in there 30 years, 20 years, stuff like that. But no one's been a top guy for like 80% of that. That's the crazy thing. Like he's been a big name to multiple generations, and there's just no one like that. There's and the mainstream, and he was the first one to be in the movies and the TV show, and I just don't see it because no one, especially now in this generation where they're like, I'm not, I'm gonna get out before it takes too much out of me. Like no one's gonna stay around that long. Roman Reigns has had an unbelievable run, not even close to anything Hulk Hogan did. And that they're just saying how big Hogan was. That said, he mentioned Vince McMahon being almost as big a name. And Vince McMahon has done everything possible to kind of ruin his name with fans. So there's a lot of people that feel Hulk Hogan did that. He had the infamous video with, racist remarks. I mean, the reason why Bubba the Love Sponge and him had a falling out is because they had a weird relationship where Hogan would get it on with Bubba's wife. And, it was just weird stuff for that. Then for a large segment of people and wrestling fans, a lot of liberal fans, this guy leaned heavy into MAGA and became a big supporter of Trump. With, whatever you feel about Trump, there's a lot of people that don't vote for him that didn't like that. All the various things that, to the point we saw the reaction in the WWE Raw Netflix debut in Los Angeles. The man was booed. Not I'm a bad guy, boo, Dominic. They're like, go away. We don't want nothing to do with you, which is after all we just said about the influence. That's how bad he damaged his name to some people. What's your perception on that? Did you look at him differently at the very end because of all those things?
I'd be lying if I said I didn't, like many others, it was just very hard, very difficult to ignore. It really was. It was just so much. And, yes, and he does need to be held accountable for all of that. I was one of many who, laughed at the reaction he got at Raw because, it was, to your point, kind of receipts for a lot of the things that he had felt he'd gotten away with. And I think that was the big difference there is contrition. There have been people who have done some very despicable things in their lives, but has shown remorse. I don't think Hogan ever got there. Even by most accounts, the apology he gave backstage after, being caught on video saying what he said was more of an apology of getting caught as opposed to apology for what he actually said. So, he does need to be held, his feet do need to be held to the fire for a lot of that stuff. And not even just that, a lot of the backstage stuff, you hear a lot of stories about how political he was when he was on top and helping to keep people down. Undertaker has the famous story about, Survivor Series 91 and, the Tuesday in Texas and everything like that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You can go down the list, Savage, Warrior, Piper, all these cats that, had things to say about Hogan, Jesse Ventura, the unionizing and things like that. There's a lot of things that Hogan does deserve a lot of vitriol for. Do I think it's to the extent of dancing on the man's grave? Maybe not. But, it's not to say that he was that we should just wash all of that away. It's very much a part of his legacy and does need to be examined just as much as the positives.
Yeah, and if you take away the political stuff and wherever you fall on that kind of stuff, I think you nailed it, and I should have mentioned it. Like all the stories of the politicking backstage, that doesn't work for me, brother, kind of stuff, and
cruiserweights can cruiserweight,
yeah, it's just that set a mindset for a long time with newer fans and newer wrestlers, and then he did all the stuff in public. Was like, God, okay, maybe he was just cutthroat to be the best in the business, and there's a lot of people that would like that. You maybe kind of go, all right, get it, not the best, but he wasn't the only one. And then you see the kind of stuff in personal life, it's like, maybe he's not that great a guy. And I just I agree. Just it definitely changed my perception. I still look fondly on all the memories, but he did a lot to kind of damage his brand for some people. But in the end, he still was making money, Real American Beer, all this kind of stuff. So to a lot of people, he just was untouchable and just forever golden for a lot of people.